Thanks for hanging in there, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. You're just coming out of executive session and ran over a little bit. But welcome to a special meeting of the Brattleboro Select Board for November 24th. Can everybody hear me all right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's one of those things where I wasn't getting any audio, so wasn't sure. We do know that the meeting has been properly warned because we checked in with Peter Elwell, Town Manager, at 5:15 when we started our public meeting and then went into executive session. So I'm starting with Chair's remarks, and I do not have Chair's remarks for today.
I don't see Brandy.
Oops.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we know she's around.
I'll text her.
That's fine. Because my next order of business is your comments, Peter, so we'll just hang on.
Yeah, and I don't have comments this evening, so thank you.
Okay. The rest of the board have any comments or committee reports?
Yeah, I got a quick comment.
Daniel, just hang on while we see if we can get Brandy on the line, I guess. Unless you want to talk really slowly.
I could just talk for a really long time, but at the same speed. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pull up some factual information on this rather than just spout off the cuff. It is pertaining to COVID-19 testing, and there are increased opportunities for COVID-19 testing for people who do not have symptoms. So let me tell you all about that. Brattleboro Memorial Hospital is working with the Vermont Department of Health and Cambridge Innovation Center to provide evening and weekend COVID-19 testing. The testing is self-administered tests in your nose, so it's not the awful one that goes right up into your brain. And it's available to all asymptomatic community members, so anybody who doesn't have COVID symptoms. It started on Wednesday, November 18th, and will continue. Testing hours are scheduled Monday through Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. and Saturday and Sunday 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. and will be performed under the rear canopy of the Richards building at BMH. You need to sign up online through the Vermont Department of Health's website, and it's a drive-up service, although you can also walk up or presumably bicycle or other transportation method, skateboard. And that is all I have to share.
Great. Thank you. And Liz?
Well, I just have questions for Daniel, and thank you, Daniel. I just wondered, is this free? Do you know?
No, I think so. Yes, I think so. It says, let's see.
Peter may know.
I can speak to that. So if you have insurance, it is definitely free because under the Affordable Care Act, this is preventative, and so it's covered. I'm sorry, I can't speak to uninsured folks who would go to get tested.
I think when the Vermont Department of Health was doing it on a Wednesday, if you didn't have insurance, that was free. So I'm presuming that it's still the Department of Health, so presumably it's still free.
Okay.
And I just have a little comment about, people who may think that the COVID-19 restrictions might be harsh, that in Pennsylvania, tomorrow night at 5, all alcohol sales will cease. So, could be worse.
Does that go along? Is there a curfew with that, or?
Well, the thinking behind it is that the Wednesday before Thanksgiving is such a big night for people getting together that they required all the bars and restaurants to stop serving liquor at 5 o'clock.
Interesting. Great. Okay. Any other board comments before we move to public participation? Brandy.
I had two comments I wanted to make. One was for all of our parents and caregivers out there, if you didn't hear, for those who have in-person learning, which is usually the hybrid model around here, beginning on Monday morning, your kiddos will have new health tickets to fill out, which will ask the question, and they will be asked directly by the administration at the schools. Did you gather with people from other households? Did you have other people in your house? And if the answer is yes, there is a chance that your kiddo you could get a call and you may take your kiddo home to quarantine and they would be considered absent on those days. So there's just a little more incentive if you know you want to maintain our hybrid structure and the abilities that go along with that. That's a real thing, and that came out today. And the other thing I wanted to really drive home to people is 211. If you're needing food or warm shelter or emotional support, holidays can be hard enough on any year. This is going to be a tricky one for some people. Please don't hesitate to reach out and get COVID emotional support or whatever else you need. It's really important that you keep your needs met.
Thank you, Randy. Okay, any other board comments before public participation? Seeing none, we'll move to public participation. This would be for the public to chime in on anything that's not on the current agenda. In other words, there's only one piece of business on tonight's agenda, and that is a review of police policies and procedures. We're going to be hearing from Chief Fitzgerald and Captain Kerrigan. And we do have a hand up. So I'm going to call upon Ricky Rosati. If you'd like to turn on your camera and join us via audio as well.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I had 3 comments. The first one was
Oh,
We can't hear you.
Ricky, all we heard was the first one was. I'm not hearing anything else right now. I'm not sure you can hear us. Just hang on for a moment, I guess. Ricky, can you hear us? Looks like they're still with us. Well, this is the radio equivalent of dead air. Sorry, everybody. We're just trying to hang on for Ricky's comment, but I don't see any other hands up, so I can't go to anyone else. So I guess we'll move on, but it's frustrating. Oh, I see a hand down now. So, okay, well, I'll do a little bit of setup just to remind everybody that tonight we're going to be speaking to Chief Fitzgerald and Captain Kerrigan. They're going to be giving us some background, some history, and some information on police policies and procedures. This is not a budget portion per se, but it's an important part of the overall expanded discussions we're having about this department. So does anybody have any comments before we invite our police captain and police chief? Liz?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I'm pleased that the police department is presenting this evening. I believe that our community needs to hear from the police department in order to review their policies, in particular in the light of George Floyd's murder and other racial bias incidents across the country. I think the people of Brattleboro need to know what the police department is doing in their name, and what their use of force policy is, how militaristic our police force may be, what the police department's personnel requirements may be, and what new policies the police department itself believes should be pursued. And, you know, the police department comes to the select board every year at budget season to discuss their policies and budgets. Last year, Chief Fitzgerald explained the Project CARE program and asked for funding to pay salaries rather than to have certain volunteer workers in the Project CARE program. And I think that we all found that very useful. This year, I think in order for the select board to be responsible to our citizens, we must do a deeper dive into police policy. That being said, I do not expect this discussion to interfere with or certainly not take the place of what the Public Safety Committee is doing, who, as we speak, are diligently assessing the issues with the cooperation of the police. And I welcome the chief and the captain to provide this information. I'm sure that after their presentation, the select board may have questions, and as always, the public is invited to ask questions.
Great. Thank you, Liz. With that, I'll go ahead and invite Chief Fitzgerald, Captain Kerrigan to join us at our virtual table, for lack of a more clever term. Hi, Chief. The Captain.
Evening, everyone. Hear me okay?
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. What I would like to do is start off this evening. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity and allowing us to discuss the police department, and recognize that this meeting is running parallel to the good work of the Public Safety Committee is doing, and we most certainly look forward to the report at the end of the year. Hopefully, we're on the same sheet of music, and there's a good chance you'll be hearing some of the same information again. How I would like to present this is do a brief historical background on what we started 6 years ago, things that we noticed that we wanted to address, how we addressed them, and hopefully the positive effects it's had. And then I would like to identify some discrepancies that I think need to be addressed real briefly, because I know the Public Safety Committee is going to do a much deeper dive in that. But just some things that I think that we need to address. And then, with the board's permission, I would like to give Captain Kerrigan a opportunity to express what the future of the department most certainly would look like. So is that agreeable to the board to start out that way?
Absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of nods, so thank you.
Well, the first thing that we looked at was the cultural change, rebranding by building trust and legitimacy. And in 2014, I had the distinct honor of being selected as the chief of the Brattleboro Police Department. And it certainly wasn't lost on me for the past several decades that as policing became more effective, better equipped, better organized, the public's confidence remained flat at best, and in most cases declined into the police. This was a very grave concern of mine. My immediate focus was to rebrand the department and start a cultural shift by making trust building and nurturing legitimacy as one of our founding principles. We always discuss policing philosophy with our applicants during the hiring process, and it continues through their time at the academy and while they complete their field training. Once off field training and on their own, over the years, many officers forgot the why. why did you become a police officer? And what was missing and very much needed were guiding principles to help them remember the why. So we applied 4 central principles of procedurally just behavior. And those are basically treat people with dignity and respect, give people a voice during encounters, kind of like the process versus outcome, be neutral and transparent, and have trustworthy motives. So in order to gain respect and cooperation, we applied these 4 principles of procedural justice, both internally and externally. So simply put, I believe how I, along with the other supervisors, treat our officers is how we expect our officers to treat the members of our community. We were very clear with our mission statement, our core values and standards, and to their adherence. These became the cornerstones of our delivery and training interactions. Procedural justice was also incorporated into our discipline process. It places additional importance on values rather than rules. Policy and behavior should both reflect the culture of the department, and this would go hand in hand with the culture we were trying to create. Another area of the department I wanted to make a cultural shift in was the guardian versus warrior mindset. As police officers, we need both. Unfortunately, I noticed the mainstream mindset for law enforcement, and this is across the country in general, was tilted more towards the warrior attitude than that of the guardian. I have extensive experience in both philosophies, and I challenge the argument that police officers need to be predominantly trained and equipped in the same manner as a soldier. The mission and rules of engagements are completely different. A soldier's mission is that of a warrior, and that is to conquer. And the rules of engagement are normally decided before the battle. A police officer's mission is that of a guardian, which is to protect. And the rules of engagement evolve as the incident unfolds. Soldiers follow orders, whereas police officers must make independent decisions. When warriors or soldiers go into a community, they are viewed as an outside occupying force. Guardians or police officers should be members of the community, protecting it from within. So we really hit hard on that. We also set out on mitigating implicit bias and not just writing a policy against it. So with the 4 central principles of our procedural justice as our guide, and with the mindset of that of a guardian, we redefined our role by creating a new mission statement and set of core values. For those of you that are unfamiliar with it, our mission statement is the Brattleboro Police Department is committed to providing a safe, peaceful, and prosperous environment for our community by policing a manner worthy of respect. While serving the community, we recognize the differences in the conduct of people who need our help, those who make poor decisions, and those who choose to victimize others. I believe our mission statement is community policing defined. It was designed from the ground up. Representatives from patrol, detectives, admin, dispatch, all met over a period of weeks and determined what it meant to be a member of the Brattleboro Police Department. That meant a lot to me. This wasn't something that I or Captain Kerrigan came up with and shoved down their throat. The mission statement I just read to you was brought to me from the ground up, and that should speak volumes of the caliber of people here at the Brattleboro Police Department, and it was everybody. not just the sworn police officers. First and foremost, they brought forward that service to the community must be at the core of everything we do. And it was made the core of our mission statement. Unlike other mission statement, it doesn't express what we do or how we do it. It states who we are, what we stand for, and the community values we represent in everything we do. In order to police our community in a manner worthy of respect, we must know our community. The mandate for procedural justice behavior permeates our mission. The second sentence of our mission statement deepens this commitment. We recognize that not all citizens want or need the same services from us, so we must know the community collectively and individually. When we have a new officer, our training officers are accustomed to taking a proactive approach with them. We needed to have that same approach with our veterans officers. We changed the culture by implementing the mission statement and core values into our daily activities. Standards were set, policies were reviewed and updated to reflect our culture, philosophy, and our vision. Standards were established. We discussed them and we made sure they were understood. Officers are held accountable to those standards. We went from annual evaluations to monthly evaluations. Every month, every single person in this department, sworn, non-sworn, gets a monthly evaluation. Our counseling sheets not only reflect traditional policing standards, but they're also evaluated on non-traditional policing activities and how you policed in accordance to our mission statement. If officers are not meeting the standards, it is addressed immediately instead of waiting for your annual evaluation. These monthly evaluations also act as an early intervention system, if you will. If we start to see an increase in uses of force, complaints against the officer, changes in their attitude, their energy levels, their appearance, it is all addressed before it has an opportunity to grow. Supervisors are, among other areas, they are evaluated on how they conduct their monthly counseling sessions with their officers and in helping them maintain the standards and assisting them in achieving their professional goals. We are working on transparency. However, in the spirit of full disclosure, I believe this is an area I think that needs more work. Not a matter of a lack of desire, but more of a staffing technology barrier. We receive an enormous amount of requests for an information, and we're just not talking locally or through the courts. I mean, from across the nation, Freedom of Public Information Act, it is just, I think the average citizen and the board would be really, really surprised about the volumes of requests of information that is asked of us. We need to work on streamlining that better. Our policies are available for anyone who requests one, and a few are available online. I believe all our policies should be made available online without an individual having to request one. The Select Board monthly reports have evolved numerous times over the years to its current format, and that is mainly due to the input from our citizens on what they would like to see in our monthly reports. So their input is greatly appreciated. The monthly reports now show a day-by-day activity report, which breaks down the types of calls we respond to, the areas where those calls happened. We also include a breakdown of motor vehicle stops, tickets, warnings, arrests, demographics of those arrests, the numbers, the hours walking on foot patrol. So it evolved quite a bit. Another area that I believe is critical to the success of a police department is relationship building. We concentrated on our non-traditional law enforcement activities so the community could get to know us and for the officers to get to know the community. And I will touch on this in greater detail here in a few minutes. To gauge the level of satisfaction of our service to the community, we made random survey calls to various citizens with whom we have dealt. Basically, how that procedure worked was our clerks would take an officer, look at the calls of services that they have performed, and randomly select every 10th call, and then call that individual and just basically asked about them. Look at, last month you called for this complaint. Was the officer arrive in a timely manner? Did they speak professionally? Did you feel valued and respected? Did you feel heard? Did you have any recommendations on how we could do our job better, et cetera, et cetera? Admittedly, this activity has slowed down over the past year or two, but very easily could be brought back to life. Some of the policies and procedures that I'd like to touch on is that first and foremost, policies should be reflective of the community's values. And I believe very strongly in that, because what works for one community may or may not work in other areas. What all policies should have in common is they should be clearly articulated to the officers, available to the citizens, and made with input from community members. I'd like to speak on some areas of our policies and procedures that may not be widely known, and on some areas that we get quite a few questions on. When you encounter a police officer, it's considered good practice for the officers to introduce themselves. However, they are required to identify themselves when asked. They wear name tags, their badge numbers coincide with their radio number, and every one of our officers are issued and carry business cards which they are required to furnish. A lot of questions and concerns over use of force. Our current policy is a product that was built upon a collaborative effort with our citizens, the town government and the police command staff. As concerns are brought to light, the policy is updated to reflect those concerns and the desires of the community and those of best practices. All use of force incidents require a report to be completed and submitted by the end of the shift or within 24 hours. So anything above compliant handcuffing gets a report. That is a threshold that I think you're not going to see at too many departments. We require anything above non-compliant handcuffs for a use of force report. And that means if they point a taser at you, they have to do a use of force report. These reports are reviewed at a minimum of 3 times. The supervisor reviews it, submits it to the captain reviews it, and then submits it to me. At any one of those levels, reports are sent back for further clarification and completeness as needed. Once again, they're looked at many times, and they're looked at through many lenses. and not just for the legal and policy compliance. Most importantly, they are viewed for compliance within our mission statement and core values. Because just because certain actions are legal and within policy, it certainly doesn't make it the best option. Incidents are reviewed with the officer about their thought process, steps that led to their decision, their perception versus reality, and what, if any, other options may have been deployed for a better outcome. The reports are then transcribed into our use of force database. This database is regularly reviewed for trends, at least monthly, but usually more often. If certain trends are observed, appropriate action is taken, and this action can range from a change to policy, a change to training, individual counseling, remedial training, or discipline, up to including termination. When we do use of force training, we place a greater emphasis on other options other than shoot or don't shoot. De-escalation tactics are a major component in all our trainings, along with time and distance strategies, isolation, and less lethal options. In use of force incidents resulting in a death, an officer-involved shooting resulting in an injury or a death, or in any in-custody death, we require an external, independent criminal investigation. The investigation is then reviewed by an external and independent prosecutor. The independent prosecutor reviews the use of force and will prosecute in cases where it was used inappropriately. Chokeholds are against our policy, and as a law enforcement officer, I cannot recall ever attending any trainings in which chokeholds were taught. Duty to intervene. Duty to intervene was and currently is in our ethics policy. Considering recent events, we have also included it in our use of force policy. Our version of duty to intervene does not apply only to excessive or misuse of force. The expectation of our officers' duty to intervene extends to all aspects of policing, their behavior and their attitudes. If an officer witnesses another officer performing their duties outside of our mission statement or not conducting themselves within our procedural justice principles, it is expected of our officers to intervene and take the appropriate action. Body-worn cameras. The current policy that we've had body-worn cameras now for approximately 2 years. The policy was developed and submitted and reviewed at the select board level for discussion and public review. Currently, the Vermont legislation is drafting a statewide body-worn camera policy for law enforcement, and it is unknown to me at this time how much or what will change in our policy. But as it progresses, we will absolutely make sure that we update the town manager and the board as details become known. Mental health. Responses to mental health crises are fluid, unpredictable, and at times dangerous. This is an area that should be examined in depth and at great length. Although we may play a role in the safe resolution of the crisis, we should not be the primary responders. We as in law enforcement. Conversations are long overdue with mental health clinicians, emergency room personnel, law enforcement, the community, elected officials at both the state and federal level, and most importantly, with those who have experienced firsthand the horrors of this gross misjustice. We need to formulate a course of action which addresses the needs and best outcome for the patient. However, currently we are the first and primary responders. And as such, this is a really good example on the importance of our officers to understand and apply our mission statement. Suffering from a mental health crisis is not a crime and is incumbent upon us to act with patience, compassion, and empathy, and in such a manner which safely resolves the current situation and should be the beginning of a successful long-term solution. Currently, we have one police social worker on our staff who is employed by HCRS. The police social worker responds with officers to incidents involving an obvious mental health crisis or to traumatic events in which grief counseling or emotional support will be needed. They also conduct the follow-ups and connects people to their needed resources. It is a Monday through Friday, 8 to 4 position and on call as needed. In addition to attending the mandatory mental health training needed to maintain our certification, it is our department policy to send as many officers as possible to additional annual trainings sponsored by the Department of Mental Health. We have started initial conversations with the executives of HCRS to see how we can improve on our current police social work model and what the next steps would be. Stops and arrests. There are two standards that we use for stops and arrests: reasonable suspicion and probable cause. Our interactions are recorded in multiple ways as to the actions of the officer. The type of arrest, whether it was custodial, cite and release, searches, if they were conducted, were they a search warrant, were they consent, what was found, what was taken as evidence, nature of the crime, use of force report, if force was used, the demographics of those involved. All that information is recorded through dispatch recordings, officer reports, body-worn cameras, cruiser cameras, and internal video surveillance within the facility. We do not train in profiling, and we have policies prohibiting any form of profiling. When motor vehicle stops are conducted, the information of the violation, location, vehicle, operator information is all logged. I can't speak for every law enforcement agency in the United States, but I can assure you that the Brattleboro Police Department we do not require, nor do we have a practice of requiring officers to issue a predetermined number of tickets, arrests, citations, the quotas that you all hear about. Additionally, we don't participate in any federal or state program which use such criteria as incentives for those type of actions. Immigration, we do not ask, investigate, or in any other way inquire of a person's status to be in this country legally. We do not notify federal agencies of civil immigration violations, and we will not hold anyone, even if requested, absence of a court order signed by a judge. Restorative justice. We emphasize alternatives to arrest by utilizing programs offered through restorative justice. Currently, we have MOUs with the state's attorney's office, the Brattleboro Community Justice Center and various businesses in town to address low-level misdemeanor offenses. Many of these issues are more effectively resolved through restorative justice programs than through the courts. So we certainly promote and use restorative justice. Militarization or the demilitarization. In the past, we have participated in the reutilization program between the federal government or the military and local law enforcement agency. That relationship was terminated approximately 5 years ago, and we have returned all equipment back to the federal government. Community quality of life issues. Community policing is not a checklist. It's not a program. It's not a project. We don't have a specialized team, and it's certainly not just one of my talking points. Community policing requires the active building of positive relationships with members of the community, both on the department as well as on a personal basis. To be most effective, community policing requires a collaborative partnership with citizens, agencies, organizations, all beyond law enforcement. Our philosophy of community policing embraces the idea that just as our power of authority comes from the people, so should many of our origins of our solutions. Problem solving must be in partnership with the community in order to be effectively addressed. We cannot ensure the safety of the community alone. It is a mindset and the bedrock that lies the foundation in all that we do. We value the philosophy, and it is so embedded into our culture that, like I stated earlier, it was made part of the officers' monthly performance evaluations. For most quality of life incidents, our goal is to educate and, if possible, to find available resources to address the root of the problem. It's not to cite or arrest. If action needs to be taken, hopefully the restorative justice track is the solution before we have to bring it to the courts. If some of you remember, a couple years ago, we had the no trespass issues downtown with the solution. And that is a really good example on how the select board, the town government, various organizations within the community and law enforcement sat down and said, okay, how can we now best address the no trespass? Where in the past, what we would do is we would go down, we would issue a no trespass affidavit, they would violate it, we would arrest them, it would go to the state's attorney's office. Nothing was being accomplished. And I think by now looking at it, by saying, okay, in order to trespass an individual on public property, and the key word there is public, we didn't infringe on private property, no trespasses, that a criminal act had to be taken. And another gross misjustice that was brought to light was there was no grievance process if an individual received a no trespass for public property. And we rectified that by putting in a, you can grieve it up the chain of command and go to the town manager, and the town manager has the option of dismissing the no trespass to make it a 30-day trespass, whatever he deems is appropriate. So that's a good example on how, on quality of life issues, we took a step back from traditional policing and said, okay, what does the community want and how we can address it? Project Care that was mentioned earlier in select board remarks, that is another good example. And that is an example I'm very, very proud of, simply because we have been getting calls all over New England on how we started up Project Care and what do we do. We have another thing about Project CARE that a lot of people may not be aware of is not only do we go where, incidents of substance misuse take place, that if a person is incarcerated or is in our custody and they are currently under medical assisted treatment, we will take them to their medically assisted treatment while they're in our custody. And that's how important we think that is. Another area that we looked at and found that we needed some additional training was in having our officers be more knowledgeable in the resources available, and then introducing and connecting them with the providers of those resources. So when we make that call, it's not a cold call. We're calling someone that we have a relationship with. I firmly believe any law enforcement agency should be an integral part of their community. And the best way to accomplish this is through non-traditional law enforcement activities. We have hosted and participated in numerous forums, community gatherings, public speaking engagements in the schools. We have gone to the homes of our citizens for specific neighborhood concerns and met with various civic organizations. Some of the things you may be familiar with, others you might hear for the first time. It's like Coffee with a Cop. That is a phenomenal program. And hopefully when the pandemic passes and we can get back to some semblance of normalcy, we can pick that back up. We try to do a lot with the youth through the Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the students up at BUHS. We host and participate in fundraising sporting events. We host barbecue lunches for various nonprofits. We just put a donation can out there and donate to the selected nonprofit. We also have officers holding various positions on boards of local human services organizations. So we really try to immerse ourselves into the community other than just traditional law enforcement. As we're implementing these sweeping changes within the department, I would be derelict in my leadership duties if I did not address how the scope of responsibilities expanded and identified the wide variety of challenges in ensuring the officers have everything at their disposal to meet those challenges and fulfill their responsibilities. We looked at new approaches in recruitment, hiring, once again, our evaluation process, our training, and in our promotions. We searched for applicants that demonstrate the character traits and social skills which enable effective policing and positive community relationships. It just wasn't a, did you pass the physical fitness test and did you pass the written test and did you talk a good talk at the oral board? I mean, we really were looking for those traits. The character traits important to us are the ones that support fairness, compassion, and cultural sensitivity. Training became more realistic, scenario-based, and conducted in smaller groups. This was done so we could better manage the officers' interactions and discuss methods on how to minimize the use of force. We watched how the officers interact. We watched their de-escalation techniques, and we discussed all the other options that were available. And at the center of those discussions are the procedural justice principles and how they should be applied. When force is used in training, we discuss, well, also outside of training, but I'm talking mainly training right now. We discuss the impact of that interaction on the victim, on the suspect, on the community, on the officers themselves, and the department. Because when there is a use of force, it impacts absolutely everybody. And we need to have that discussion, as uncomfortable as it may be. The goal of this new training module is to move towards practices that respect all members of the community and away from policing tactics that can unintentionally lead to an excessive style of enforcement. That was our goal. So what we are aiming for is not effective policing, but also procedural justice and fairness in policing. Our training module is top down, all officers. It's continuous. It's done daily. We do quarterly trainings that rotate throughout the year, and all of it is done in accordance with our mission statement. Some areas that we train in, but certainly this isn't an exhaustive list, is critical policies, community policing and problem solving, interpersonnel communication skills, bias awareness, cultural diversity, hate crimes. We had the Matthew Shepard Foundation come in and conduct a statewide, where we were the host agency, conduct a statewide training that was very well attended. Once again, our trainings are scenario based, where we look at situational decision making. We talk about the guardian mindset. We talk about how the rules of engagement evolved as the incident evolved. We talk about procedural justice and impartial policing, trauma, victim services, mental health issues, domestic violence, sexual harassment. It's a pretty long list. And like I say, we break it up into quarters, and we will take 2 to 4 of those things in one quarter, 2 to 4 the next quarter, and we constantly keep rolling it over. So they don't hear it just once in a year to maintain their certification. Now, I've been speaking at length about what we do for our community, but I'd like you to know what we do for our officers. I'm going to kill the myth. The bulletproof cop does not exist. We are human, and we experience the same trials and tribulations as everyone else. Officers who protect you must also be protected. They need to be protected against physical, mental, and emotional health problems, as well as against the inherent hazards that come with the job. Their wellness and safety is not critical just for them or their families or the department, but also for the public safety to the community. Officers walk into risky, tense situations and encounter tragedy on a regular basis. Officers respond to every tragic event in this community. They experience the same sense of horror, loss, and desperation time and time again. These tragic events are not just a one-time event for them. It's repetitive. Unfortunately, the horror stays with them for the rest of their lives. Officers are also physically injured, just basically carrying out their duties. Interesting enough, a large portion of officer injuries and deaths are not a result of interactions with criminals, but as a result of poor physical health and poor nutrition, lack of exercise, sleep deprivation, and substance abuse. An officer whose capabilities, judgment, behavior that are adversely affected by poor physical and psychological health may be a danger to the community and to other officers. I would never allow one of my officers to go on patrol with unserviceable equipment and we shouldn't allow them to serve if their mind and body are not focused and up to the task at hand. The biggest obstacle to overcome in addressing the safety and wellness of our officers is the law enforcement culture at large and the stigma it attaches to officers who seek help. This needs to change. I firmly believe and promote throughout the department when an individual seeks help, it is a sign of strength, not weakness. We have peer-to-peer counselors, which allow officers to speak to other officers in a confidential manner. Every major incident, there is a debrief. These debriefs range from an informal conversation to professional listening sessions. Whatever the officer needs, we will provide. The command element does not attend these debriefs in order to make it more comfortable for the officers to speak freely about their concerns, their experience, and about their feelings of fear or failure. We have worked diligently in overturning the tradition of silence on psychological problems and encourage officers to seek help without concern of negative consequences. Many errors in judgment can also be traced to fatigue, which makes it harder to connect with people and control your emotions. We do not allow officers to stay on third shift for any period length of time. We have noticed changes in behaviors and attitudes of people that do our overnight shifts for a long period of time. So you can stay on third shift for a year, but then you have to come off. You have to get off third shift. You go to first or second shift, get out there, get your sleep back in order, enjoy some sunshine, some fresh air. So we're constantly watching this, and we have implemented that into our rotation of assignments. We also have a modern, very well-equipped gym on site and certified physical fitness trainers to help officers create a personal fitness plan in order to maintain their fitness. Officers are required to take and successfully pass an annual physical fitness test. We have incentives that are awarded to officers who score above average, excellent, or outstanding on those physical fitness tests. Officers that feel that they are not respected, supported, or treated fairly is one of the most common sources of stress by officers. By adhering to our procedural justice, our principles, and embedding support for their wellness and their safety and success in all aspects of our policing, we clearly demonstrate how much we value them and what an asset they are, not only to the department, but to the community as well. As I stated earlier, some of the areas that I think that we need to improve. Discussion of national and local major incidents. Our supervisors review daily the actions and tactics of our officers. They discuss decision-making, other options available. They identify training discrepancies. I think it would be a really good service to the community to take that same approach and concept to the next level on any major incident where there is a potential to damage community trust or confidence in our department, or in law enforcement in general. Whether that incident occurred in Brattleboro or elsewhere is irrelevant. The erosion of trust and confidence is the same. And I think we should be able to meet and carry on you know, a respectful civil discussion about the incident, and just come away more comfortable than not saying, well, it didn't happen in Brattleboro, so why are we talking about it? We feel the impact. It's there. You can feel it when you go out on the street. It's discussed at every dinner table throughout town. So let's just get it out in the open, as uncomfortable as that may be. I think this would go a long way in maintaining the trust and confidence from the police department in their community and from the community in their police department. The citizen oversight. Currently, we have the CPCC, the Citizens Police Communications Committee, and they do a very good job in reviewing complaints, summaries, and acting as a neutral body in police-citizen interactions. I believe it would be in the town and department's best interest if the CPCC's charge was reviewed and ways discussed for them to become more involved. You've heard me talk a lot about data analyzing and sharing. Transparency is paramount. Accurate data is critical. Currently, we do not have a data analyst to pull, record, categorize, and disseminate the volumes of data that we create. Accurate data that can be categorized in different layers can also help the department identify, isolate, understand, and train in areas more quickly and efficiently that we are deficient in. Recruiting. Right now, we have nobody specifically trained in recruiting. Specialized training for an in-house recruiter to find and bring the best candidates to Brattleboro is in great need. We absolutely could use that skill set. And last but certainly not least, I think we should continue and go in great depth on our trainings with interactions with diverse members of our community. So that is my, I would say brief, but people would laugh, but that is my history of the department, where we're coming from, I think where we're at now. And with the board's permission, I would like to have Captain Kerrigan queue up and basically say, okay, from here, going into the future, this is how we see the department going.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was a lot. And please go right ahead, Captain Kerrigan. Unless the board wants to jump in on anything, but we're good? Great, thank you. Thanks, Captain.
Sure. So the chief is retiring at the end of the year, as I think you all know. And when that happens, I'll have the pleasure of serving as your interim chief until a permanent replacement is selected by the town manager sometime next year. The chief just gave a wonderful overview of the department, a great explanation about where we were, where we've gone, where he hopes we go. I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss my intention to continue much of the good work that Chief Fitzgerald has done and that he just discussed. I'd also like to identify certain areas that I hope to emphasize and prioritize going forward over the next couple of months or period of time that I serve as your interim chief. It's my hope and my intention that when a new chief is selected, that I will hand over to her or to him the best department in the state of Vermont. I've had conversations related to that with our lieutenants, with our supervisors, that our objective over these next months should be to make this department an absolutely flawless department so that we hand the new police chief the best department in the state. So to that end, the high standards of ethical conduct and procedural justice the chief just discussed that are imposed upon our officers will absolutely continue into the future. The chief discussed our monthly officer and supervisor evaluations, the monthly meetings that they do. Excuse me. These meetings serve, as the chief said, as an important tool to monitoring officer conduct, their job satisfaction, their frustration, their morale, all of those things. And it, in effect and in name, acts as our early warning system. Most police early warning systems in the United States focus on misconduct and mistakes and complaints. And they indicate that after a certain number of complaints, certain action is taken. After a certain type of misconduct occurs, officers are identified for some sort of intervention. I will tell you that no police officer wants to break the rules and make mistakes and commit misconduct. Our early warning system here at the police department focuses on symptoms that can lead to misconduct rather than waiting for that misconduct to actually occur. As the chief said, officer frustration, low morale, reduced job satisfaction, poor paperwork even, all of those things can be indicators that something is amiss with an officer. In short, our supervisors are trained to detect these changes in officers, to counsel the officers, to correct them, to find out what's going on, to get to the root causes of these early signs of frustration. And we want to catch these types of things, you know, being rude to a citizen, a decline in the quality of work that they're doing. We want to intervene during those symptoms rather than waiting for that frustration to grow into an improper use of force or some other type of misconduct. One of the things that the chief talked about was solutions to community problems and community safety problems coming from the community. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, and have had the great pleasure over the last 6 years of working under his guidance and vision on how to do that. I agree that that's the best way to find solutions to community problems, particularly those related to safety issues. The police department is absolutely an important part of that process as a part of the community, but there are many safety matters for which the police should not be the predominant decision makers, and maybe not even play a predominant role. The chief discussed a couple of examples of that. One example, as he said, is Project CARE. You know, when our community was and continues to be ravaged by the opioid epidemic, the police department, rather than just imposing what we thought was the best solution, engaged with some community groups, HCRS, Turning Point Recovery Center, Groundworks, Habit OpCo, The Retreat, the list goes on. And that collaboration resulted in Project CARE, which, as the chief said, is a nationally recognized effort to reduce overdoses, increase access to care, to MAT treatment. And that program, those solutions came from the community, not from the police. We certainly had a seat at the table, but those answers did not come from us. As the chief said a couple of years ago, the community recognized that the way that the police department was responding to and handling homelessness, public intoxication, other social problems, particularly downtown, but generally on public town property, the way that we were doing that was ineffective and unfair. The police department, again, engaged in a collaborative effort. This time it was mostly with other government organizations, the state's attorney's office, the public defender's office, community justice center. And we came up with new ways to deal with that. And those groups helped us come up with new ways to deal with these issues. Our trespassing process was completely rewritten from the ground up. And I won't reiterate everything that the chief discussed, other than to point out again that these solutions came from the community, as they should. I very much hope to use this same model to address what has been a long concern of the community, but is now rightly coming to light. And that is how police department interact with folks with mental health struggles or that are in some sort of psychiatric crisis. As the chief said, the police in some circumstances have a role to play in that, but the community needs to determine, and we hope that they help us determine, whether or not the police should be playing a predominant role in that. I will let the cat out of the bag a little bit that I've been engaging somewhat with the Community Safety Review Committee in that regard, and look forward to working with them in the future, and with the select board, and with any other interested community groups or community individuals to come up with better ways to resolve those issues. The solution to that problem or those problems, those issues, just like those others, should come from the community. As interim chief, I intend to continue that trend, to continue doing that and embracing the idea that it's only through those kinds of collaborations that that these issues can be resolved. Regarding transparency, I'll briefly touch on that. I share the chief's view that transparency is exceptionally important. Every year, Brattleboro taxpayers entrust about $17 million to the town government to provide it with a variety of services. And some of those services are provided by the police department. There needs to be a lot of transparency related to that, not just because of the amount of money, but because of the kind of work that we do. How we spend your money, what we spend it on, what we do with it is really a matter of great public concern. And like other public concerns, the best way to publicize that information and to make it transparent should come from the community. Our transparency levels are already amongst the highest in the state, and I'm proud of that. But I look forward to engaging with, again, community groups, the Community Safety Committee, the Select Board, the public in general, about what they want to know about what we're doing and how we can effectively provide it in a meaningful and digestible way. The town, as many of you know, and certainly the Select Board knows, has done a lot of important work over the past year related to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. The police department certainly is engaging in all of those town-sponsored activities and processes, but we intend to do a fair amount of work on our own as well. We're currently actively engaged with several groups to bring more advanced training in-house here to the police department. So that our officers not only understand implicit bias and DEI issues, but also have specific tools and techniques at their disposal to ensure that both systemic inequities and their own implicit individual biases don't influence their daily decisions and actions as police officers. We also need to make, as the chief discussed, additional efforts to increase diversity in our own ranks. That's an area where we are not strong, and it will allow us to show the community our dedication to this work. It'll improve our internal creativity, our perspective, our problem solving within the department. It's an area that we need to continue to develop. The chief talked about officer and staff wellness and health. As he discussed, the department places a value on this physical and mental wellness of our staff. In order to support our officers, the department should double down on those efforts. That includes mental wellness, psychological resilience of our officers, management of the cumulative stress, the vicarious stress that officers absorb over weeks and months and years and decades of responding to traumatic events, and then management of stress from major critical incidents as well. I intend to pretty heavily emphasize that type of work as interim chief, and I'll encourage the new chief to do the same thing once she or he is selected. When we ask our officers to face some of these difficult, traumatic, and sometimes dangerous situations, we owe it to them as their employer to take care of them. Very importantly, well-trained, well-rested, and well-compensated, psychologically healthy police officers have the ability to analyze culturally complex situations, make measured, collaborative decisions towards overall public safety. And that's rightly what the community should demand of us. On the other hand, tired, overworked, poorly paid, stressed out police officers have much lower capacity for that type of work. The town clearly wants and deserves the former and demands it of us, and I intend to support our officers, help our department work so that we can continue to provide that level of service. Those are some of the areas I intend to emphasize and stress, in addition to continuing the good work that the chief has been doing these past years. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss some of this and the management work that we have going on here. And the chief and I'd be happy to take any questions or participate in any discussion that you all may have about the department.
Thank you, Captain. And thank you to both of you. Speaking of resilience, that was quite a bit, and I appreciate sitting in one spot for us for so long. Speaking to that really briefly, I just want to point out that the board has been sitting in this one spot since 5:15. Does the board want to just dive into a few questions and then take our break, or do you want to take a break now and then come back with some questions for the gentleman? This is, does anybody have an opinion? Just jump in. No?
Are you going to help do bedtime? Do you want to wait till 8 or does it matter?
Oh, well, that's very considerate of you.
Well, I mean, huh?
No, absolutely. We can push it a little bit closer to 8, and then I'll be able to participate a little bit. Dive in. I'm just the chair here. Brandy.
I want to say ahead of time that I'm not going to have a lot of questions because I'm really trying to keep myself. It feels calm. It feels nice to not feel like we're in a position of debate, which we've been in a lot at these meetings. And so I'm actually just really enjoying listening. I do want to say, I'm going to miss you, Gunny. You helped me out once with a personal question. I've been able to call you anytime I've ever had a question in my last profession. I have a great affinity for you and your sister, and I feel very warmly about that, and that's not going to go away, that's for sure. So I wish you the best. And tonight, unless something changes in my mind between now and when we break, I just kind of am enjoying listening and taking in information from you and from Captain Kerrigan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brandy. Yeah. Ian.
All right, I got a bunch of questions. But I'll just have just one right now. But first off, thank you so much for all of this information and the presentations. I've learned a lot, and I just have some. It's more just clarifying stuff. I'm curious if you keep track of the percentage of different types of calls, and if so, Chief, you were speaking to the some of the difficulties with calls that focus around mental health crises. If you have a percentage of how many of those calls are those type of calls?
Chief, would you like me to speak to that? I think you just muted yourself.
Am I on or off?
Now you're on.
Okay. No, I was going to do that. I know Captain Kerrigan is working with our records department on specifically that, and I was going to ask Mark to handle that.
Sure. So the short answer is yes. We run reports pretty regularly on the types of calls that we get. In fact, I think the annual report, probably for the last maybe 3 or 4 years, the majority of when the chief has been doing it, and even the monthly reports, maybe just for the last few months or so, contain a breakdown of the types of calls that we respond to. One of the issues that we run into, and the chief spoke to this about data, is the call that comes in is not always the call that we get, or excuse me, the call that it turns out to be. So there's a reason, and if you look, the vast majority of our calls, or at least the plurality, maybe not the majority of our calls, are suspicious activity calls. And that's because it comes in as a citizen who sees something that just doesn't seem right, or hears something in a neighbor's apartment that just doesn't seem right. So that will get logged as a suspicious activity complaint, and it could turn into a barking dog. It could turn into a domestic assault arrest. It could turn into a medical problem. So it's difficult sometimes to track how those calls turn out, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
A welfare check, a mental health welfare check could come in as a welfare check. It could also come in as a suspicious circumstance complaint. It could come in as a juvenile problem. If someone, says something about seeing a young child out on the street alone or something. So data can be difficult to track based on what comes in, what the officer finds, how calls are categorized, and that sort of thing. And we do have some mechanisms in place where we can try to drill down into that, but it absolutely is a challenge and something that we're always working on and working with. And there are, of course, technological limitations as well. The database that we subscribe to obviously has its own sort of quirks, as all databases do.
Thank you.
Liz, Ian, do you mind if Liz jumps in?
Oh, yeah, of
Well,
course.
I just had a follow-up question to Mark's answer. And is that why Chief Fitzgerald was talking about having a trained database person so that they can understand the change from what the original call in is to what it ends up to be in order to properly categorize the data?
At the risk of speaking for what the chief meant, I think that's one thing that he would very much like to have a data analyst to do. But there are many, many other pieces of data that we either process or in some cases create that need to be analyzed. An example that I use a lot is DUI arrests. Let's say we have a year where DUI arrests are down 50%. That could mean that our officers are lazy and they aren't stopping enough cars. That could mean that 10 bars in town closed. That could mean that we did such a good job last year that we solved the problem. People don't drive drunk anymore. These are all possible interpretations of a single data point. And we need to drill down into that, or we need to have the ability to drill down into that, or preferably to have, people get PhDs in data analysis. So we can't really just ask the police department collectively or ask a records clerk who is very well skilled in the jobs that they do to all of a sudden be crunching a bunch of numbers and determining causation based on different data points. Chief, that was kind of a long answer. That's kind of where you're at with it?
Oh, that was perfect. Especially the layers, looking at the different layers, exactly what you hit it right on the head. Thank you.
Daniel?
Thanks. So building on that, also just kind of appreciating you both taking the time to share this information with the public today. And, I don't want to take up too much time in this meeting. That we have the community safety review ongoing in parallel. I'm glad to hear that things seem to be going well with that. For folks who are curious about it watching, they can find minutes and agendas on the town website. There's a handy link on the right-hand side. There's also a survey. So going back to the data points, I've always been interested in using data to, figure out what's going on. And also, it's a thing that is both helpful and you can tell all kinds of stories from it. And sometimes, you have all these data points. I've seen the monthly report sometimes, and we have, many, many pages of what happened with each particular call. And then sometimes we have, demographic breakdowns and whatnot. Are there a couple of key metrics or key kind of like tags that the department is looking for? When Ian was asking about, oh Lord, whatever it was that you were asking about, I imagine, I actually am kind of the point person for a data system in my day-to-day work as well. And so sometimes, like with COVID, for example, we applied a COVID tag to any client that we work with that's impacted by COVID, just so we can track that over time. Are there any particular kind of metrics that the department is really paying close attention to and tracking over time?
So the short answer is no, there isn't one or two particular ones that we watch. We kind of monitor quite a few of them in order to gauge where we are, where we've been, where we're going. And of course, as you said, it's very fluid. Data is always coming in, and then there's current data, and then there's predicted future data. I actually had one area that I spent a whole ton of time on a couple of years ago trying to drill down was mapping, doing some mapping about our calls for service. We did a lot of work trying to look at where we're deploying officers, when we're deploying officers. We did some work with the planning department and actually the Wyndham Regional Commission as well to try to sort some of that out. I had a little email exchange with Emily Megas Russell earlier this week related to that. And we've had no success with that. The state database that we use for policing doesn't speak the same language as the mapping system that the town currently subscribes to. So I guess if I had to pick one area I wish we had a lot better data, it would be mapping. But please don't take that as a singular answer. There are many areas that we look at.
Thanks.
And I guess Ian should continue unless, yeah.
My next question is about training. So in the legal field, you have like continuing legal education courses that you have to take to stay on the bar, and they have to be within certain areas. So it's like a number of hours, and it's particular areas of education each year. Is it a similar structure for an officer? They have to have a certain number of hours of training, or is it a different format, or is it just kind of whatever training you guys are choosing to have officers do?
Sure, I can talk generally about that, but let me first specifically answer your question. We have the same requirement. So
okay.
We all have a level 3 certification with the Criminal Justice Training Council. It used to be called a full-time certification. They changed that maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So we're all have level 3 certification. And there are requirements by the training council that we have to meet every year to do that. I can go more in depth in that if you want to, but there are minimum requirements that we have to meet. Sort of an old school police training philosophy is you train in the areas where you get sued. So, I mean, that's just sort of the way it was, or the way it is. I can tell you that, and you know, those are pursuits, use of force, false arrest, you know, those types of things.
Mhm.
I can tell you that the chief and I have moved way beyond that. We of course do what's required to meet, you know, have all the officers keep their certifications. We also do training in those critical areas, those kind of 12, there are sort of 12 critical areas, but we also try to be a little more proactive in our training and identify areas where we need to improve based on what the community wants, based on areas we're seeing officers struggle, de-escalation, the time and space issues related to use of force. One of the things we recently started doing is, I spoke during my presentation a little bit about how we use our early warning system to identify sort of some traits or developments in work that can be precursors to misconduct. We've started kind of messing around with the idea of doing some training in those areas, the areas that can be precursors. And that kind of fits nicely with the idea of the officer wellness and health and psychological resilience and that sort of thing. So I don't know if that's sort of talk around a little bit. I hope I answered your question, but also maybe gave you a little insight and perspective about our training philosophy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does someone else want to jump in? Liz?
Well, also, I'd like to thank you both I had pages and pages of questions to ask, but you've answered them, except for this overall question about manpower. How does the department determine how many officers are necessary? You know, I understand that you'll have 3 shifts and that you have it like a geographic area, but how does the department determine you need however many officers you have?
Sure. So I'm going to try not to get too far into the weeds with this. We currently have an authorized full strength of 27 sworn staff. It used to be 28. It was lowered to 27, maybe 2008 or 9. The chief might be able to educate me on that. But I think it's about 10 or 12 years ago. It was lowered to 27. We operate under the premise that we need to have a minimum staffing of 3 officers on duty at a time. Our officers work 10-hour shifts. They work 4 10-hour shifts a week. It's the 40-hour work week. And obviously there aren't 30 hours in a day. So that allows for overlap during certain periods of the day. And that serves 2 purposes. When our staffing is high enough, we're heavier staffed during those periods of time. So we strategically make those overlap periods during times when call volume is higher. That tends to be mid to late afternoon, and then later in the evening between 9 and midnight. And then there's a very short overlap in the morning between day shift and, or excuse me, between third shift and day shift. The other purpose that overlap serves is it gives officers an opportunity to come in and take care of paperwork, or if they're in a cruiser that is equipped with an MDT, a laptop, which the vast majority of them are now, they stay on the road and do that paperwork, but it gives them a break from responding to calls so that they can write their reports from the incident. So that's generally our staffing model. Depending on how far into the weeds you want to get with how we determine how many officers you need to do that, there are things called relief factors. There's a relief factor calculation that all organizations do. It's not just the police department. And that's a calculation that uses the amount of vacation time staff gets, the amount of time they're unavailable because they're in training, the amount of time they're not available because they're sick, the amount of time they're not available for a variety of different reasons. And it gives you a factor by which you multiply your minimum staffing in order to determine the size of your organization, the staffing you need for your organization. There are also sort of some national standards as to how many police officers you should have, given the size of your community, the demographics, crime rate of your community, that sort of thing. So that's a long, convoluted answer. But currently our staffing, full authorized staff is 27 officers. And our minimum that we want to have on duty at a time is 3 uniformed patrol officers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, if you don't mind, I'll just add, one of my questions was, where are we currently at? Aren't we down 5 or 6 officers?
6.
We are
6.
currently down 6 officers, and as of December 31st, we'll be down 7.
Wow.
Oh.
So I invite you to comment on that further or not. I guess that would feel concerning to me as far as burden on the rest of staff, but I know there's overtime situations. And I've asked in the past about overtime and that balance, you know, that we need to strike. I guess I don't have a specific question, just kind of probing that a little bit.
Sure. The short answer is yes. When we're as short-staffed as we are now, we have to hire off-duty officers that are either off-duty on a work day, you know, or are on a scheduled day off. And we have mandatory overtime. We post our overtime for volunteers that want to work it, and in the case that nobody volunteers for it, which is very common, We have a rotating involuntary assignment list where officers are required to work overtime. That can be challenging. It can be challenging from a management perspective when there's, bigger projects or community projects that we want to work on, meetings we want to have officers go to or engage with the community. It can be challenging for officers when they want to take vacation and can't because the staffing level won't support that. It can be a problem. It can be challenging, but we also have a very, very good team of officers here, and they do a really, really good job of taking care of each other and supporting each other. Especially this time of year during the holidays, we'll have maybe some older senior officers whose kids have, moved out, gone to college, or moved on. We'll work extra so that younger officers with young kids at home can get some time off. We have a really good team that really takes care of each other and supports each other. And now and again, I might even pick up a shift. So.
And I guess just an easy follow-up, a couple in coming up?
So, sure. So we currently have 3 officers that we're doing background investigations on that are involved in the hiring process. Our experience historically is maybe 2, but more likely 1 applicant will make it through the entire hiring process past where they currently are. So that would give us, and I think we've had a lot of conversations about this before, about the hiring pipeline for police. If a perfectly qualified person walked into the police department and was hired by Peter Elwell today, they won't be trained and ready to work until it would be September of 2021. So they won't be contributing to our staffing table until that time.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I have a couple more, or maybe one more, but I want to be cognizant of taking a break. And if you 2 gentlemen don't mind hanging on for us through the break, I thought maybe if Gary wanted to sneak in his comment or question, because he's been very patient. I think might know this Gary. It's Gary S.
Patience is my middle name.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, guys. First of all, I just want to thank you for this. This is a very good conversation and dialogue, and having everybody come together like this at the table. I love it. Just want to say thank you to Chief Fitzgerald, Captain Carrigan. I'm on the CPCC committee as well, also Vice Chair. For the time, I guess, like I said, I met with Chief Fitzgerald, usually was at Hannaford or out there when we had our CPC meeting. And as brisk as it was, it was very enlightening and encouraging. Very, very good to me, and learning a lot from each other and coming together, and also with Mark Carrigan also as well too on the CPCC, and meeting him a lot in Harmony parking lot, talking and having conversations and coffee with the police. And going to the cookouts. It's a shame that the COVID really kind of put things in a clamp. I'm hoping once it opens up back again, we'll have even more dialogue with the public and with each other. I just want to say thank you, gentlemen, for your courage, your fortitude, servitude, commitment, and your leadership. Looking forward to working with the next chief that comes in on our behalf too, with CPCC and with the town. And don't stay a stranger, Chief Fitzgerald. And as mentioned, I talked to Ferris Cathy, and he said, hoorah. So I don't know if you know him. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys too. Again, hopefully by next year when we come together. This is us awesome, and I'm looking forward to bigger things coming next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Well, we're going to maybe take a break on that positive note. When we get back, I'd like to invite Ricky, if they can get back on, just because they were trying to make a comment earlier and it wasn't working out. So I just wanted to let that be the first person in line when we get back. And let's see. Do you want to do 8:10 or 8:15, board?
Fine with 8:10.
8:10.
8:10's fine.
Gonna
Okay.
have an early night tonight, huh?
I would love it, to be frank, but
Oh,
thank
I
you.
agree.
Don't jinx it, Brandy.
Sorry, wood right here. It's real wood.
Okay, so we'll be back at 8:10. Thanks, everybody. Hang on there.
Oh.
All right. I guess we'll start again at, I have 8:11/8:12. Thanks for rejoining us, everyone. And would the board like to continue with a couple more questions or take our public who have a couple hands up?
Public.
Oh, I forgot. I was going to invite Ricky. It looks like they might still be having trouble, but Ricky, if you can join, just raise the hand or whatever. If not, the board, would you like to just go to a couple public comments or questions? Great. So I see Shay first. Hello.
Hi, everybody. Long time
Hi.
no Zoom.
Yeah. Well, I've seen you a couple times, but you haven't seen me, so it's good to see you.
Yeah, you have been coming to some of our meetings. I'm grateful.
Yeah. I
was going to say, Ian, you're welcome to do a ride along to one of our public forums at any time. Just saying. Just kidding, though. Can I ask for Emily to also come on at the same time, who's also here, my co-facilitator in the Community Safety Review Project?
Sure.
Awesome.
Oh,
there she is.
Emily's ready. Wow.
Hi, folks.
Right on cue. Hi, Emily.
Hi. Thank you for having us here. And thank you to Chief Fitzgerald and Captain Kerrigan for sharing so much about your work. I wanted predominantly to just, ask a question into the process points. I don't think there's much functionality in discussing any of our real work or our findings at all yet, because that's emerging. The process is very much live. But I do think it's worth just discussing for a moment the process. It's my understanding that this meeting, this special meeting, is a different, slightly outside of the process that you hold with regular departments annually around the budget. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's our budget season, as we call it. So we regularly discuss budget and policies, procedures of every town department during that process.
Right, but having a special meeting for one department is slightly outside of that pattern, as I've been following along. Is that correct, Liz? You were going to say something?
Yeah, because of the overall climate. We didn't think that there was room in the general meeting requirement for this broad of a discussion or this deep a dive. So that's why it was called out.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. It seems a little bit, it seems slightly less efficient or less functional than could have been possible to me to have this meeting before or without any communication with or collaboration with the committee that you have brought to do very overlapping work. Only in that, I think the PD has done a great job of sharing a lot of information about their policies and perspectives on their work. And also, we're doing hundreds of hours of analysis about the very same thing. And it's a little bit hard for me to yet understand, without any communication or collaboration from you guys about this meeting, how this meeting might be weighed or in what way it will function inside of your deliberation around our review. I think that the review process has been incredibly collaborative and epically collaborative within the community, including with Captain Kerrigan, who's just been so cooperative in our endless requests for data and policy and also in helping set up listening sessions with officers and so much other of the work. And I think the PD seems to recognize, as we do, that what we're offering is actually a gift. We've been hearing in this meeting about how data analysis is really a function that is kind of a gap in the system of the town or the police department, right? That there's not an analyst who's there to help wade through this really dense information. And that's largely what we're doing. And so I think what we are going to offer at the end of this is really a large and profound gift to the town and to the police department, which is both a deep analysis of policy and procedure, which is a bit of what you seem to be getting tonight, but without the ability to look at those policies and procedures measured against statistics, measured with the perspectives of people in the community. And I think that whole package is going to be really sweet for you all to get together, those policies mixed with statistics, mixed with the narratives from people in your community. But without that context, it brings me to the question about how are you going to operationalize your commitment to listen and prioritize the voices of especially marginalized people and all of the community service agencies and everybody that you are hiring us to listen to for you. So I'm interested in hearing from you just about that process piece. I think about how are you going to operationalize your commitment to valuing that information, given that this meeting, some of what you're going to hear is going to be incredibly aligned and some of it might really not be. And that might create a new conflict for you all that wouldn't have been created if there had been more communication, collaboration, or a different order of operations. Does that make sense? So I'm interested to hear from the board about that before Emily speaks to another piece. And again, I think that the PD has done a great job of sharing today, and I have no qualms with what they've shared at all. It's more of a process question for me.
Liz, I'm happy to take a crack, but I saw your hand go up.
Yeah. Well, Shay, it's an interesting question, but I think that, our responsibility every year to hear from the police about their policy and then about their budget was separated out this year, I would think, for obvious reasons. And that's the only procedural element at work here. And in a sense, it's an opportunity for the police to present to the public what they do every year, but just in a more expanded manner. And I don't think it has any relationship, it's certainly no impairment of the select board's ability to listen and to hear the work of the Community Safety Committee. None at all. So I felt, and I believe that the rest of the select board shares my opinion, that we couldn't just have the typical presentation by the police that we do every year. It would be a dereliction of our duty as select board. But that has really nothing to do with our equal responsibility to hear and accept the study that you're preparing, that we are all waiting to hear. It's, they're two parts to a whole.
And if you don't mind, I'll just chime in. I don't see any other hands shooting up from the board. But I would agree with what Liz said, and I would also say that we hold certain, I've been on the board, this is my 4th year, if I'm counting correctly. So there are issues that come up every year. And one of my questions that I just asked about the officers and the level of staffing is something I ask every year. And I wouldn't expect your committee to be in tune with asking that question for me, nor should I charge the committee with asking that question for me. So I feel like the committee is doing very important work, but we have to continue doing our very important work with direct oversight over every single town department. And I think I agree with Liz as to why it felt right and the rest of the board seemed to agree that we could have a separate night. And I don't think we all thought it would go on as long as a normal meeting sometimes goes on. But that was like, my next question actually has to do with something that speaks to my institutional, or like my last few years memory of speaking to the department about it. And I wouldn't expect the committee to go over that question. So. Anybody else?
I don't know if the responsibility is to, I think it's Tim's responsibility to call. I wanted to just call on you, Brandy.
I've done that before too.
Oh, yeah, we're both used
Brandy?
to doing it.
Go ahead. And you call on people.
Brandy,
Yeah, no, I've done it myself. I actually also thought that it was good to separate it out. And I think that also just comes from my time sitting on the board. We sometimes do interrogate. This is an interesting situation because we have this entire other group coming in. So maybe communication between us and your group, you're right, could have probably been a little bit clearer, like heads up, this is going to happen. But I think for me, like just out of budget habit, I was like, yep, we're going to interrogate separately this year. That seems fine. Like we've done it with the police. I think we've done it with the police before and fire. And so my apologies. You're right. There could have been clearer communication between the select board and the community group.
Ian?
I think they may have wanted to come. The committee may have wanted to co-warn the meeting and be able to participate. Without that warning, we actually can't all gather here as a committee. So that's just one of many benefits of communication that could have happened. Sorry for interrupting, Ian.
Go ahead, Ian. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just bring my perspective as this being my first budget season. This is my, let me see if I'm counting right. First time on the board. That it is actually really helpful to kind of get terminology and understand the whole, especially with this year, there's a lot of information that I don't have yet. And so to have that future discussion with your committee, I think that this is just beneficial for me. I'm learning a lot already. So, and for the public to have this being a discussion that's happening. And so I think I agree with what Liz said about, for this particular year, it making a lot of sense to kind of give this its own night. But I'm very excited and looking forward to, and I'm actually really excited to hear that there's already been discussion and communication with the police department and with your committee. And I'm looking forward to what you bring in December.
So Emily, did you have?
Yeah, thanks. I'll just add a few things because I think, this happening as a special meeting kind of gives us an opportunity to join in and to hear also, while we've been in a lot of dialogue with particularly Captain Kerrigan, a little bit with the chief as well. And I'm super grateful to both of them for their commitment to cooperating with the review. They've put in some hours as well. We're putting in hours, but they're putting in hours also, getting us the data that we're asking for and working together to figure out what data the system actually is capable of providing us. That's been a big part of the work that particularly Captain Kerrigan and myself have been working on together, is trying to figure out what can the system, what information can we get out of the system that answers some questions that are analogous to some of the questions y'all have asked, and certainly questions our community has about the police. So yes, thank you to the captain and chief for their labor in participating in this review. But I think that this sort of timing is interesting for me. Definitely along with Shay, wanting to hear again from the select board your commitment to the project that you have empowered us to facilitate with the committee, but also just let you know that we are doing a full putting in dozens and dozens of hours doing a full review of the policies and procedures, not just as policies and procedures, but also against the data that we do have access to look at the effectiveness and efficiency of our police resources against the policies and procedures that they themselves hold, right? As well as in regards to some more objective data like outcomes related to police enforcement actions. And so I just want to let you all know that while I agree with Captain Kerrigan that there's definitely some areas of improvement in the system where we can, you know, as a community, you know, learn more if we understood the system more, and if we had more data analysis capacity. There's actually a fair amount of data that's coming to us based on some of these questions that we're asking and that y'all have posed tonight as well. And that myself and a few members of the committee are looking into that data, and we're going to be tracking some of it more specifically to not just look at it as an aggregate, but to also look at how, as a community, our systems respond to the different types of codes that come in. So the captain was talking about like the suspicious activity, for example, which is a pretty generic term. And so we're looking into, so when that call comes into dispatch, what gets activated? What does the response tend to look like? When a welfare check code comes in, what gets activated? What does that response tend to look like? And what are the outcomes of those responses? What is the effectiveness of and the efficiency of using police resources to respond to those incidences, which frankly make up a large percentage of the calls that come into the department, as Captain Kerrigan was saying earlier. I also just want to use, so that's to say that a fair amount of the data that we're analyzing and we'll be reporting on is coming from the internal, coming from the department itself. The analysis, though, is a level that we're offering, as she was saying, kind of, you know, really what we're providing to you all. We are also looking at another huge piece of data that is not generated internally by the department. And I want to use this opportunity to make y'all aware of that piece of data, which you may or may not be aware of. It is a piece of public data. There was a UVM professor named Stephanie Seguino who did a very large study around the state of Vermont in trends in racial disparities in traffic stops. And she specifically looked into Brattleboro 2014 through 2019, as well as other municipalities and cities across the state. But this is some very strong data, some very clear data. And we are going to be centering some of that data in our report as well. It's very specific to Brattleboro. And it does have some concerning report around racial disparity in traffic stop data. So while I do appreciate and recognize that the department has done a lot in recent years to address and focus on implicit bias and diversity and equity training, I think that that's true. I think that the department has really focused on that. The question still begs to be asked about how effective that training has been in when we look at outcomes around racial disparities in particular areas of our department's work. So that is an active, open question. And there's a lot to be asked about how training, generally speaking, outside of police work, but in human psychology, what does it take for training to actually integrate and then actually result in different outcomes? And I think that's a question that we really need to be asking at this time. So those are that's just some like spoiler alert. That's some of the stuff that we're looking at right now. So I appreciate the chief and the captain's presentation. And you're going to hear a lot more and a lot more specifically about the data as it relates to those policies and procedures that the chief and the captain spoke about.
Awesome. And the other large piece of data that is more qualitative, right, yes, you all will receive is that, you know, something like half of our time is also being spent listening to the people who live here, mm-hmm, both individuals who are just community members, as people who have lived experience of, you know, situations that lead people to have more contact with policing systems. And also, we have been talking with so many nonprofits, folks who work in the medical field, in the mental health field, in the DOC, like just across the board. We've really been collecting people's experiences about how the whole system, not just Bratt PD, but the whole community safety ecosystem is or is not functioning against these policies that you're hearing about. And some of what you're going to hear is going to be incredibly aligned with what you've heard tonight. Some of it is not relevant to what you've heard tonight because it's about other pieces of the system. And some of it might not be aligned with what you're hearing. The policies and procedures are very well intentioned trying to do. The lived experience of people might vary from that. And that process concern for me is because that's the part of the process I've been focusing on, I think. And so when I hear we have an equal responsibility to listen to this, you know, these guys at their job review doing a really great job of sharing the best parts of their work and hundreds of people's lived experience, I have a little bit of a qualm about that equal two parts of a whole mentality, because I think for me, the lived experience of hundreds of people and all of the social service providers in the community and the stats need to be weighed very heavily by you as per our collective process that we're in together. And I want to make sure that you just understand the volume and depth of that information that is coming your way in the context of this conversation, because it is going to be a lot, and we'll walk you through it. I assume we will be having a special meeting because we have plenty to share, right? There's so much there. It's actually a very rich amount that we have to gift you. But I want to just throw that context in there that there is going to be quite a lot more to add to this conversation, and you have to be listening to this with that in mind, I think, in order to make the whole thing go. So thank you for hearing us out. I see another one of our committee members' hands in the participants box, so I should probably be quiet.
Okay. Well, thank you for the update and the feedback. And
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your work. I think we'll go to Kelsey Rice. I forgot to remind people to introduce themselves if they could, and blah, blah, blah. Kelsey, you there? Oh. Hi. Hang on. We just have to unmute you, I think. There we go.
Okay. Just really quickly, I'm not going to really dive into the committee right now. I think the facilitators really covered that beautifully. But I just had a question for the captain and the chief briefly, and then just a little bit of a comment. So my question is, you brought something up that I've been thinking about a lot since the beginning of this process. There's a lot of talk about a different systems response, sort of vetting out who should go to what sort of calls. And as a survivor, it's really concerning to me to think about the potential time lag, right? As you mentioned, a lot of calls regarding domestic assault are, suspicious activity. It could be a dog barking, it could be an assault. So I do worry a lot about someone showing up that's not police trained to respond to that very dangerous situation for everyone involved. And then having, the wasted time potentially in getting the proper services out there. So that's a big concern I have. And I'm just wondering what either the captain or the chief think about that. What sort of solution, or I don't know, just your thoughts around how we might manage that and when we're thinking about those options. And then also, no secret that my personal agenda is always to get domestic violence on the table. And I just really hope as we move forward, it's way past somebody's bedtime right now, I apologize in the background, that this progressive thinking that you really pride yourselves on, and we've seen with Project CARE and other areas, I would really like us to start moving in the direction of applying that to domestic violence, because it is a huge part of the work in this community and every community. And although we don't talk about it, I think you officers know firsthand that that's true. And I think there are a lot of ways in which you could be more in the forefront of sort of preventative measures. So I just hope that can become part of the conversation. But I'm just speaking as Kelsey right now, not a committee member. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Gentlemen, one of you want to take a crack? It was sort of a two-parter.
Sure. So there's a lot there, a lot to unpack there. Regarding the suspicious activity call, there could be a barking dog, it could be an assault. The current system is that the dispatcher gathers facts, information from the caller, relays that either to a police officer or to a supervisor, who then determines what the type of response is going to be. And, you know, we've got a lot of experience to draw on, a lot of sort of institutional knowledge. Something that sounds like this is actually most likely that, and we'll gauge our response based on that. As far as if changes are made as to how we categorize calls or how we consider calls and what resources are sent to calls, I don't have an answer for that, but I absolutely think that the points that Ms. Rice made should be part of the conversation. You know, just as we don't want to send 3 uniformed armed police officers to a cat in a tree, we also don't want to send the wrong resource to a terrible, violent family dispute. You know, we want to be cautious of both of those potential mistakes. And I think that will be, I hope that that will be part of the conversation and does not get left behind. So all I can offer to Kelsey is, you know, my commitment that, you know, we'll participate in those conversations with an eye towards the fact that there is a place for police to be responding to dangerous situations. As to her second comment, I think it was more just a comment for her, but I would go back to the point that I made earlier that the chief alluded to as well, that the best solutions to these really complex community problems come from the community. So, and those solutions are by no means perfect, but you know, if there were a community drive to engage in some sort of really collaborative, comprehensive way to try to address domestic abuse in our community, the police are one tiny piece of that response. Domestic abuse is something that I've worked a lot with as well. Obviously, as a police officer, I was the special investigator for the state's attorney's office for a number of years. I was their domestic violence investigator. And I know that the police response to that is one tiny piece of the community response, just like the police response to the opioid epidemic is one tiny piece of that response. So, you know, if there were a move for the community to engage in a more involved process that, hey, how can we address this as a community safety issue for the whole community, I'd be all for that. I agree with that.
Thanks, Captain.
Sure.
Chief, anything to add, or should I move on?
Well, I think in the spirit of time, and if people are in the queue, we should move on. Mark handled it very well.
Yeah. Thank you. I do want to say that issue is top of my mind lately with COVID and these isolated people. I think it's exacerbated on many levels. I think about it a lot. Ellen, you are welcome to join us.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks very much. Yeah, my name's Ellen Schwartz. I live on South Main Street in District 2. And the reason I came to this meeting tonight is that it was warned as a meeting about, oh, there's a little thing here. Okay. It was just on my screen. It was warned as a meeting about police policy, and I already sent to the select board a proposal for some policy changes that the Brattleboro could make, which I am not going to go into in detail. You'll be glad to hear because it's lengthy. So you all have the details of it. But I just wanted to bring this up in this meeting, and I'm working here in Windham County with a group of other residents of Windham County who are trying to get this change made for the Brattleboro Police and also for the Windham County Sheriff. And what this concerns is the fair and impartial policing policy, which Brattleboro already has the model policy from the state of Vermont. And the improvements that we would like to see to that policy are really designed to strengthen not to strengthen, let me say it a different way, to ensure that the wall between local police and ICE and Border Patrol is really strong, and that the local police are not cooperating with ICE and Border Patrol around the detention or deportation of immigrants in our community. So there's 6 specific changes to the policy, and I just wanted to bring that up tonight since this is a discussion about police policy. I know it's not a thing you're going to decide on tonight, but I wanted to just have that be part of the discussion. I also sent along the model policy from Winooski, which is a town that Winooski, Burlington, Norwich, and Hartford, and the Addison County Sheriff have all adopted these changes. And I sent you all the Winooski policy so you can see what it looks like with the improvements embedded in it. And I guess I'd be interested in if there are people who have thoughts about it, and also just to be clear on like what further steps we should take to move this forward. And just also to say that we have been in touch with a community safety review team. So that's a step we've actually already taken.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. Yeah, I got the email and I did respond to you as quickly as I could. Yeah, I actually found it very interesting, and I think we should try to fold that into our discussion. Certainly, we might want to wait till after the committee comes back. I'm curious about. I think what Ellen pointed out in her email is that that the state policies can be like a floor, and then individual communities, speaking to the best solutions coming from communities, the community can decide to sort of raise that bar a little bit, obviously within the bounds of legalities, you know, to the extent that we can. But I'd like to read more into it. I don't know if anybody else, other board members, want to just comment on if you've had a chance to read that. Liz. Oh, and Brandy. So sorry.
I really haven't had a chance, but I know Chief Fitzgerald spoke to, you know, for want of a better phrasing, lack of cooperation with ICE. And I don't know if Ms. Schwartz gave the same email that she sent to us also to the police chief and the captain, but I would assume that she should, or we can. And again, I think it could be part of the overall public safety discussion through the committee themselves, or with the police and the select board and the committee when the committee's findings are presented to us again.
I haven't done that, but I would be happy to send it on to both of them. I mean, that's part of what I was looking for, is like, where do I send this stuff? But yes, I'd be very happy to send that on to both of them. And just to the point about this, that H518, which is the law that was passed that says that the fair and impartial policing policy, the model policy, is a floor that communities can add on to, that all of the communities, that if a community adds on to it or changes it, the Attorney General has to approve those changes. And all of the communities that have made the specific changes that we're asking for have had their enhanced fair and impartial policing policies approved by the Attorney General. I think that mainly the Attorney General is making sure that if changes are being made, it's not coming in below the model level. But they have all been approved by the Attorney General. So the example I sent you from Winooski, that one was sort of the model for the other communities, and he has approved those.
Great. Yeah, and I'll just also say that in case you missed it, Ellen, it was right around 7 by my memory when Chief Fitzgerald spoke to a few of those issues. But again, matching it up with exactly what your document would be something we want to look at a later date. I
didn't sit because I had another meeting and I wasn't able to get on.
Oh yeah, well I just want to let you know that it's there, so if you can go back. I
can listen, great.
It would be about an hour in. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. Oh, Brandy, sorry.
No, it's not a big deal. I was going to just say that thank you. I did get a chance to read it, and kind of like I was with the captain and chief's presentation tonight, I'm just kind of information kind of gathering and listening until we get to that part where we're having the full community project presented to us. Sorry that I never remember the right name, but we all know what I'm talking about, I think. So when the community safety review project comes to us, then I kind of want to take what I heard tonight and some of what you sent, Ellen, and hear it all in its fullness.
Absolutely. All right. Board, further questions? Is Ian?
Yeah. First, I have a procedural question, Tim. So for public warning of a meeting, for a discussion like that, with
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, is that like enough on topic that it doesn't matter?
Well, I was starting to get uncomfortable when I was finishing up my explanation because I realized I was referring to an email that the public hasn't seen yet. But then I just saw Peter nodding. So, I mean, it's certainly within the warned agenda item, but it does get to the idea of not even all of the board had a chance to look at it yet, so we shouldn't. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not like it was really a question.
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean I was thinking the same thing, and I just wanted to acknowledge that it's a good question.
Yeah. I have two more questions. The first was, as Tim alluded to, I did a ride along. The chief helped set that up, and I really appreciate it. And I learned quite a bit. And I was wondering, is that something that is available to anybody if they contact you guys, or is it more of the coffee thing that you were referring to earlier? And I'll just add my second question in, so I'll stop talking. You're talking about Brattleboro being an example with Project CARE. I was wondering if our disengaging with the reuse of military-grade equipment is also something that is fairly unique to Brattleboro, or if that's something that is a larger pattern of police departments around the U.S. Are also doing.
Sure. So the first question, the ride-alongs, there's no carved in stone rule, but generally speaking, we only do ride-alongs with applicants, potential hires, or someone with some sort of public position, such as yourself, who has sort of a vested interest in the internal workings of the department. We have done it before, with a college student who may have a particular interest and might even be a potential applicant in the future, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, it's applicants, and then, select board members, or, if the assistant town manager wanted to do a ride along, that sort of thing. So that's the first question. The second question, I'm only aware of anecdotal examples of other departments who have returned all of their equipment. So I can't really speak intelligently to whether it's a trend or whether it's broadly occurring. We did it a long time ago, and I can speak to the fact that the federal government is much harder to return property to them than it is to get property from them. But so I don't really know specifically if there's a trend there or not.
Okay, thank you.
Board? I feel like I could ask one more, and it wouldn't take too much time. It kind of goes along with the military equipment question in a way, because when I heard about that was about 2 years ago when Chief Fitzgerald came before us and asked about body cameras, and the board was very receptive to that request. I think it was you said it was 2 years ago. I had a question about that because I think maybe you've gone over this before, but frankly, I forgot. The body cameras are worn and always recording, but there are circumstances where people do not want to be recorded. Is it a situation where things get redacted sometimes out of request, or do they get turned off in sensitive situations? such as, I don't know, I mean, I'm thinking of the domestic violence situation. Could you just go over that policy a little bit? Because for some reason, I can't remember what we had discussed a couple years ago. I guess it's not that strange, but.
Sure. Before I answer, I am just going to throw in the quick caveat that the state, the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, is directed by the legislature, is currently writing a statewide body camera policy. So I will answer your question based on our existing policy, but great. I can't promise you even 90 days from now what it's going to look like. But currently, our policy does allow for exactly what you just said. If you want to use a domestic dispute as an example, officers' body cameras will be recording when they respond to a domestic dispute. Once the initial emergent nature of it is resolved, and there's no immediate threat of violence or the fact that a police officer might have to engage with someone physically, that sort of thing. If we do have an idea who a victim is, we will tell them, hey, my body camera is recording, and we will give them the option of, do you want to have your statement about what occurred recorded or not? That's written into our body camera policy, and the officers have a pretty nuanced understanding of that. There are a litany of other circumstances where they either keep them running or don't. We go to the hospital, the emergency room, not infrequently. There are guidelines about whether or not officers have their videos going or not in those circumstances. That sort of thing. So, that policy is a public document. I'd be happy to share it with you or anyone else who's interested in it. But it does address those issues. As far as redaction goes, that's quite tricky. The videos that we make are a public record under the state definition of a public document. So folks can request those, but they do need to be redacted, and that's a fairly time-consuming process. It's not easy. We're asking a records clerk to use a fairly advanced video editing system to try to edit out voices or faces or that sort of thing. It can be quite challenging. So it's possible, but it's not as simple as just handing someone a DVD. Does that answer your questions?
It does, yeah. And I think if I had further questions, I could kind of formulate them and then ask in another meeting. It sounds like it can be, complicated sometimes. Thank you. Well, board, any further questions or comments for our chief or captain? I don't see any hands up in the public section. No? Okay, well, oh, I see Liz.
I get to ask my favorite question. Shall I make a motion to adjourn?
I think you certainly have everyone's approval.
I think a motion to adjourn can't be discussed.
Ooh. Will we have 2 more hours?
Make that motion, Liz, and say thanks.
I move to adjourn. Thank you all very much and have a safe holiday.
Okay.
Yes.
I was just going to take the time to thank our chief and our captain. Mm-hmm. And Brandy was raising her hand, so.
I was just saying, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. All those in favor of adjournment, raise your hand.
Aye.
Board members,
Aye.
thank you. That's 5-0. Thank you, everybody.